So for this video, I'm gonna go over a couple movies that I may have missed over the last couple weeks, either because I just didn't have the time to review them, or maybe because I didn't have a whole lot to say about them, or maybe because I got too lazy and didn't want to do like individual videos for some of these movies. But let's go into it. This is going to be one of two videos I'm going to try to do. This is going to be the more audience-friendly movies versus the awards-friendly movies. So I'll talk about some movies, including Ticket to Paradise, Pray for the Devil, Slumberland, and the Weird Al Yankovic movie. So let's get into it. The first one was Ticket to Paradise, which stars George Clooney and Julia Roberts as a divorced couple who have a daughter. She just graduated, and they learn that after a month of meeting this new guy in a different country, she's engaged to this guy, and they decide to go to the country that they're getting married in, and they want to stop their engagement because they just met. So this was a movie I was not looking forward to, even though George Clooney and Julia Roberts have made some good movies together, Ocean's 11, Ocean's 12. Even I thought Money Monster had some sort of charm to it. This was a movie that I was not looking forward to. I'm not a big fan of romantic comedies in general. And we've been getting a lot of romantic comedies this past year, surprisingly. Like movies that would have come out back in, like, say, 2005-ish. Like, we had Ticket to Paradise, we had Lost City earlier this year, we had Marry Me. And just long story short, I don't like this movie. I really didn't like this movie. There are a couple things that work. Mainly the supporting cast is actually better than the main cast, and that's kind of a problem for me. Like, Billie Lourd, I thought she was really good in the movie. The actor who played the fiance, I thought did a really good job, like keeping up with George Clooney in a couple scenes. And also the woman, you see in the trailer, there's this woman who's in between George Clooney and Julia Roberts on the plane. Her character was funny, and I was actually really glad when she came back later in the movie. She was funny. Also, there's a trope in this movie that is subverted that I actually kind of like. There's this trope that I kind of hate where a woman's in a love triangle and she's with this guy who's like a complete jerk, and yet there's this other person who's in love with her, but he's like her best friend, so it's kind of weird. And I actually like that this movie kind of subverts that in a way, so I kind of like that. Also, the fantastic location of this movie, it looks gorgeous. I wish they kind of spent more time kind of like looking at this location. Anyway, the main thing I don't like about this movie is the main characters, particularly George Clooney. I thought he was just awful in this movie. I thought he was just a terrible person, a terrible human being. Also, a lot of the jokes don't work, except for the ones that are kind of done by those three people that I mentioned earlier. A lot of the jokes kind of come off as lazy, boring, and even sometimes kind of offensive towards the people on the island. And personally, I was kind of offended. I feel like it should have been a little bit better about that. And even though it kind of subverts a couple tropes, it's still really predictable. If you've ever seen a romantic comedy, you know how this movie is going to end. And I didn't enjoy this movie enough to say watch it in theaters. It may be worth streaming at some point, so I'll give Ticket to Paradise 2 out of 4 stars, stream it. But at least Ticket to Paradise can take one thing into consideration. It's not Pray for the Devil. Holy God, this movie was awful. Pray for the Devil is a movie about a woman who joins this exorcist school, and she learns how to do all this exorcism stuff, and she learns she may be connected to something larger with a demon. And this movie has a weird history, because this movie, I remember, was supposed to come out earlier this year under a different title called The Devil's Light. And then I remember seeing previews for it, and then they delayed it all the way to Halloween, and they changed the title to Pray for the Devil, and it still didn't make me interested in this movie. The only positive things I can say about this movie is that there are some actors in this movie who aren't that bad. They are okay, but I still really didn't like their characters. And admittedly, there were like one or two surprises where I just didn't see that coming, but I didn't like them because it's so generic. It's just so boring and lazy, and it's like it's been done in other movies before. This is basically the movie. It's a lot of things that are seen in other exorcism movies, like, bending backwards, eyes turning, and oh my God, like, is there anything interesting in this movie? Not really. No, not at all. And a lot of the actors do a really terrible job, particularly the lead actress. I thought she was awful in this movie. There are so many terrible scares throughout this movie. There's a lot of jump scares. There's a scare involving a little girl that's not scary at all. And I've seen a lot of these things in other movies, and particularly the ending. The ending of this movie is awful. Like, it just abruptly ends. Like, I guess they were just done with this movie, and they were like, yeah, I'm just done. Screw it. Let's just get out of here and go. Let's just end it that way. It was an awful ending to an awful movie. And like, why do so many exorcism movies these days have awful endings? Like Devil Inside, The Possession, The Last Exorcism. By the way, this is from the director of The Last Exorcism, so that explains a lot. So this is a movie that it wasn't scary, it wasn't interesting, it was just boring, it was horribly acted. A lot of stuff in this movie I've seen done hundreds of times before. I am so over this movie. Jeez, this is a movie that needs to be exorcised from my memory. I will give Pray for the Devil 1 out of 4 stars. Skip it. Next up is a much better movie than the previous two, and that is Weird, the Al Yankovic Story. Now, it's a parody of biopics, and it basically shows how Weird Al Yankovic kind of became really popular and all the struggles that he faced, and it's supposed to be a parody. So this was a movie I was kind of looking forward to. It looked like it had the right amount of cheesiness, and it was like the right amount of ridiculousness, because like personally, I'm kind of over a lot of biopics these days because a lot of them are kind of just the same. They follow the same beat for beat, and it looked like Weird was going to do that, and it kind of felt like Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, which I enjoy. So in this movie, Daniel Radcliffe plays Weird Al, and surprisingly, he's really good in the movie. I thought he was really funny. I thought he was really, like, he plays the seriousness, but because it's also really funny and supposed to be a parody of, like, other musician biopics, that it kind of works for me. And I was actually laughing a lot throughout this movie, like, mainly the first 2 acts, but I'll talk about that. And even though I was laughing, it is surprisingly genuine at times, especially towards the end. And also, I guess my main issue is the 3rd act, which I felt kind of went a little too far in like what you can do, and I felt like it just changed its genres, and it didn't really work for me as well in the 3rd act, but it still tried to have that feeling of a biopic, like a biopic, like say Bohemian Rhapsody, and it just, I don't know why they went with this direction in the 3rd act. It just kind of feels random. Like, I can get like the first 2 acts, it was a parody, but this is just too far. The other actors do a decent job. Evan Rachel Wood does a decent job as Madonna. Rainn Wilson as Dr. Demento. And again, it's very funny. I'm a fan of Weird Al, so it kind of makes sense to me that a movie based on his life would also be a parody. So I think that's a really smart move. So I do think this is a really solid movie. I do think it's a lot of fun. It can be really funny and surprisingly genuine. And if you're getting sick and tired of all these musician biopics, then this is a perfect movie for you. I would have changed the 3rd act a bit and kind of like continue on with the trend of being a parody of what it's supposed to be, but instead it tried to be a parody of all movies. I'm not sure if that was supposed to be about that movie he did in the 80s, but it kind of felt random to me at times. But I would still recommend this basically pretty much for Daniel Radcliffe's performance. I'll give it 3 out of 4 stars. See it. And the last movie I'm going to talk about in this video is called Slumberland, which stars Jason Momoa as this dream figure who's in this land, and there's this little girl who finds herself in this dreamland, and she meets up with Jason Momoa, and they have to figure out what's going on. And the movie itself is strange because normally with a movie like this, usually a fantasy type movie, I usually find that the background is better than the foreground. Here it's actually the opposite, because the actors in this movie do a really decent job. Jason Momoa is really good in this movie. Marlo Barkley, who plays Nemo in this movie, I thought she did a really good job. And kind of like, I'm going to compare this to The Adam Project, because that was also a movie on Netflix. And I felt like the humor and heart was balanced perfectly with this movie. My main gripe is that some of the supporting characters in this movie aren't really that great. Like, the actor who plays Nemo's dad is not that great. The main villain is okay. I just didn't really care for them too much. And also, I feel like the actual visual effects in this movie just weren't that appealing to me. Again, I feel like a lot of visually stunning movies are a lot of visual effects heavy movies, whether it's sci-fi or fantasy. Usually that's their main priority, and the foreground is the second priority. And again, here it's the opposite. So I guess I also walked in thinking it was going to be like a complete disaster. And I guess I could say I was surprised I didn't hate it. It's fine, it's passable enough, but I can see a lot of the flaws of the movie. I just feel like I wish I cared more about the other characters in this movie, and I kind of would have fixed a lot of those special effects. I'll give Slumberland 2 out of 4 stars. Stream it. So, those are some of my reviews for some of the movies that came out in the past few weeks. I'm going to try to do another video soon where I talk about some of the more art house movies that, in some cases, I actually had to go out of my way just to see them. But what do you guys think of some of these movies? Comment down below. Subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.